Okay, everyone, we're back doing a follow-up to the previous video that we spoke on, the one where David was giving you a little history about himself and how he started collecting and how he lost his collection.
Yeah.
One of the things that was brought up during that discussion, and he touched on it a little bit, and some people asked for him to talk about it a little more, was conventions then and now. If you remember, the question was asked, how does conventions now compare to conventions in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, I think what you said was, did they look the same? Because one of the peeves that you have about shows personally is how much modern stuff is there. And you were like, was it like that? Basically, I think that was your question.
Yes.
And of course, in a nutshell, no, absolutely not. It was not like that at all. It was a different world. Because if you're younger watching this and you've been going to shows for the last 20 years, you probably don't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say just start off. Approximately, what year did you start going to shows? To give people an idea, to compare the times.
Maybe like 88, 89. And
Okay.
that would be comic book related as opposed to toy shows or combo shows or like genre specific.
Right.
Like I think in the last one I mentioned Star Trek because that was a big one, was the Star Trek show when it was going around in those days. So that's when I had started. So yeah, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you started in the 80s. Now, did you start with local shows? And when I say local, I mean, you know how every area, it seems like, have their little shows that come up once a year, twice a year. When we were in Illinois, they had one that came up every 2 months. Yeah, every other month they had a show, the Bridgeview. I think it was the Bridgeview Toy Show or
Comic.
something. Yeah, Toy and Comic.
That's the one that Warren was doing.
Yeah, but that one came up like every other month, and it was a decent size.
Yeah.
But compared to, I'm guessing San Diego Comic-Con is small.
Yeah.
And you'll basically see the same vendors out there. So give us an idea of when you first started, the size of the show.
Probably, and this is where I brought it up before, my affiliation with Great Eastern Conventions, where I didn't run a table, but I was always there. They knew me. I brought stuff to sell or trade, or I would meet people there to sell and trade with, and I did pretty good that way. And the Great Eastern Conventions would go around on the East Coast, and they would set up primarily comic conventions. And that was, again, my first experience, was going to the comic shows. Very little toys there. It was mostly media. So they had comic books, they had bootleg VHS cassettes of basically anime. Back then it wasn't anime, it was called Japanimation. And you couldn't get that stuff in the US. So people would have rows of DVDs. I mean, I'm sorry, not DVDs.
VCR tapes.
VHS cassettes, bootlegs. And they had animation cells, and they had autographs, and they had art panels from comic books and things like that. Very little in the way of toys, but that was my first experience. And the Great Eastern shows was probably literally every 2 or 3 months. They would go to the hotel on Arlington Street in downtown Boston, but it was a big showroom. They had like 200 dealers in there. So none of them were really small, not in the Boston area. And then and I can't remember who used to run that circuit, but you had the toy show. There was a couple of different people that would do toy shows. Some of them were about that big. Some of them were like 800, 1,000 plus tables. You know, they'd have what looked like an airplane hangar rented out, filled with tables, all toys, not too many comic books, things like that. But nothing, nothing that I guess you would call small. But that's probably because it's in the Boston area. And so it's a major city, you're going to see larger, or you would think you would see larger shows. There weren't too many breakaway shows where maybe there was 50 tables, something like that, because I think that's more like Bridgeview, right? Maybe 50 dealers in
Yeah, they
there,
probably had
something
a
like
hundred.
that.
Yeah, they could have had 100 because that
Maybe.
space was big, and then they had a little,
The ante room.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
little overflow room or whatever. So when did you start transitioning to toy shows?
Probably like 92, something like that. And as I got more and more interested in building action figures, primarily G.I. Joe, the 60s and 70s, like the original Adventure Team and America's Movable Fighting Man 60s G.I. Joes, as I got more and more into that. And there was no internet to speak of. Internet was out there, very few people were using it. I think I mentioned that in the last one. eBay. eBay was starting to come around in the early 90s, but you couldn't host photos on it. You had to have your own website and post your own pictures and put a link in the description, and the person would have to copy that link and go and find your web page to look at the pictures of the product. And it was really easy to get ripped off in those days. You know, if somebody hosed you and you sent your check, because no PayPal either, check or money order, and you didn't get anything, tough. You know, you were taking a risk with eBay big time. And so that wasn't too big of an option. And if you wanted to find stuff, you either had to go through trade magazines that would heavily advertise either for sale or often auction pages. They would rent pages in the book and with pictures of stuff with a number, and have a call-in day where you would have to get on the phone and call in and find out what the last bid price on something was in a certain window, and then bid up or just give up and hope that that guy was being honest about what the auction price was on the other end of the line. And so either trade magazines or at a show was the only way to get anything. So it was important to get out there and get around to these shows.
So now back to the. Well, we'll start off with the comics first, since you talked about that first, and you said that they sold comic books, cells, autographs, VCR tapes,
Yeah.
and you said roughly 1,000 desks, tables there or so, 500 to 1,000 tables or
Well,
vendors.
that was the big comic. That was the big toy show. The comic show, well, the Great Eastern show, is probably at least a couple hundred tables.
Okay, so with that, how many people you would guess had the exact same thing? They had the same VCR tapes, the same books, the same cells, the same. You understand the question?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You didn't, and I kind of know where you're going there. When you went there, you didn't see too many new books. New books, you went to the comic shop. That's where the new books were, because there were stores, comic shops, and in my case, it was New England Comics, and I kind of worked loosely with them. I wasn't employed by them, but I would like freelance help them with grading at their stores in Alston and in Brookline, and that's where you went for new stuff. Older stuff, you went to the show. I mean, they had their wall books in the comic store, and most of you know what I'm talking about there, where you looked around, all around the close to the ceiling would be hanging in these mylar sleeves the books that were older and valuable, or they were behind the counter, and there was always a bunch of books all the way around, and that's how you would find older stuff unless you went to the show. Newer stuff at the show only if it was a real hot ticket item, but nobody came to the show with a whole bunch of all new comics.
And to the toy shows, is that roughly the same thing you got? You went there. Did you see stuff that was in the stores?
Never. I can't really honestly say that I ever saw or noticed at least new stuff. And when you did, it stood out. When you came in there and you saw something that was an item that you would have been able to find in the toy store, Toys R Us, KB, you're like, why does he have that? It's seriously. I remember at one point, I want to say it was the Rhino, Toy Biz, the Rhino from their Spider-Man series was a tough one to find. It wasn't showing up at the KB stores. You couldn't find it. And when it was at the show, I think I remember even seeing one at a convention. I'm like, why has he got that here? Because you kind of knew eventually it was going to show up at KB. You would find it. New stuff, you went to the toy store when there was toy stores. Like I said, KB toy stores. KB was my favorite. There was KB and there was Toys R Us. You went to KB, you could find the stuff, red ticket items, where they would hand write on it, 2 for $5, 3 for $5, 3 for $10, whatever they wrote over their price tag. I don't even know why they bothered to put a KB price tag on it if they were going to just red line it and write something else on the ticket. But that's where you went to find new stuff. When you went to the toy shows, you went there specifically because that's where you were going to find vintage toys, vintage action figures, without having to go through one of the trade magazines. That was the point.
Okay, well, one of my the main thing that I was getting at was at the current toy shows. Not only do you see the stuff that's in the store, it seems like you got 100 vendors, 75 of them have the same thing.
Yeah.
The exact same thing. You got 100 vendors, 75 of them have Marvel Legends. The Black Series, Funko
Star
Pop,
Wars, yeah.
Star Wars.
Star Wars, the Black Series.
Right. They have the same figures. They have the new G.I. Joe. And it's like, okay, we got 100 vendors here. 75 of them have the exact same. It's like, why do you need them?
And to make matters worse, their prices are all the same too.
Yeah, they might be like $2-3 off of each other.
And so you got to circle around. If it's something new you're looking for, you got to circle around 10 times and try to remember who had how much for what, and try to negotiate because some of them won't.
Yeah, some of them will.
Some of them will. Some of them won't. But yeah, and that's a pet peeve of mine. I know that's a pet peeve of yours.
Yeah.
Is going to these shows and it's like, come on, I didn't come here to look for stuff that should be hanging on the pegs in Walmart, should be hanging on the pegs in Target. They're not because they're all at the show or they're on eBay. That's really the problem. And you should be able to walk into these stores and buy it and can't. But I don't want to walk into, here we go. You got me going now. I don't want to walk into a toy convention and find stuff that should right now be at the local Walmart and pay 3-4 times the price for it. There's something about that that just feels wrong. It feels wrong to me. That bothers me. And I'm not there looking for newer stuff. I do have some newer stuff. I have a bit of this, a bit of that. I have some 6 scale figures. I've got some Mezcos. I've got a handful of Build-A-Figures. I haven't gotten a Build-A-Figure for what, 2 years?
Yeah.
It's been a while. I do have some of the GI Joe classifieds. Kind of gave up because I can't find them. A couple of subscribers gave me a couple.
Yeah,
They were
they felt
like,
bad. They felt pity on you.
I guess. No, I appreciate it. That was very nice of them. They, don't give up. But I don't feel like I should be walking into a show and seeing new stuff. I'm going there looking for vintage. Vintage is where my heart is. That's what I'll always gravitate back to. I'd rather have the old stuff, like you see all through the museum here. My stuff, a lot of your stuff, is the vintage stuff. It's the old school stuff. 60s, 70s, 80s, from the golden age of action figure collecting, really. That's my preference. And I think it's a lot more interesting, a lot more colorful. These companies, they make the same things over and over again. They reissue things. You got 10 different companies making the exact same action figure. You've got companies making figures they already made, maybe repainting them.
Yeah.
One of my arguments, and this comes up on our weekly roundup sometimes, I dogged on Ronin Warriors a little bit because I was like, the Ronin Warriors, they're like $150 a piece, 12 scale. That's about the size of the old Playmates line from 94, 95? I can't remember the exact year. You can get them mint on the card for less than the new ones. You can get the original Toy Biz X-Men and Spider-Man figures mint on the cards, Iron Man figures, for less than the new ones. So why do they have commemorative ones that they're selling you? This is a kind of a misconception a lot of collectors have. I can't get the vintage stuff. It costs too much. No, it doesn't. Most of it is cheaper than the newer stuff. There are pieces that are going to be stupid expensive. The popular lines, the lines from the big five, like Transformers, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, Masters of the Universe, the original ones can get expensive. They can get real expensive mint on the card. But most of the other toy lines, they're not. They're not that bad. When you do the comparative pricing, and I'm like, why are you paying so much more for a new figure that is cheaper to buy the vintage version?
Well, let's get back to.
I know that's another discussion. It is.
Let's get back to comic shows. Now, you said you were going since the 80s. Let's talk about pricing.
Yeah.
How much it cost for you to get in there. How much was autographs, pricing
It was
in the 80s? How much, roughly?
80s and 90s was a lot cheaper than it is now.
Okay.
Now that it's super popular, the price keeps going up. To get into a convention, some of them were free, free admittance, and the show just it fed off of the dealer table's expense. Some of them were $2 to get in, $5 to get in. It wasn't that much. Great Eastern, as part of your admission price, $3 to $5, I think it was, you got free autographs. The artists, they had artists and writers and colorists there from not like in modern shows when you go and it's like dude has his own comic he's printing himself and he's there to promote it, and if you buy one he'll sign it kind of thing that you see sometimes in the new shows. They brought real people from Marvel and DC and eventually even Image would come to these shows, and they would be doing autographs for free without limits most of the time. I must have gotten 20, 30 signatures from Sam Keith. Who is it? Liard from Ninja Turtles. I probably had him sign 20 books. No charge. McFarlane's the only one that ever put a limit. I told that story last time. But he's the only one. He kept changing the limit. He kept lowering it until he got to a single autograph. One per person, and get out of my face. He was you had to see him. Because I'm not trying to get into that one again.
Yeah.
But yeah, autographs for free. Artists, and like I said, they were legitimate artists, legitimate writers, people whose names you would know. They would do sketches. I can't remember who it was. He was the current artist of the Punisher for Marvel at the time. Punisher sketch, $20 for a commission. Things like that. It was cheap. If you went to the bigger shows, like the sci-fi show or the toy show, and they had guests for autographs, Lou Ferrigno was there. The surviving cast of Lost in Space was there, and I mentioned they're easy to remember because I saw them at so many shows. Stuff like that. An autograph, $10, maybe 20 at the most. What does an autograph run you now? How much does it cost to go and get an autograph at one of these shows? How many hundreds of dollars even? Or thousands? Because I know Harrison Ford, there was a big hullabaloo about Harrison Ford wanting something well over 1,000 for autographs.
Wow.
And people will pay it. But back then, it was no big deal. It was like, yeah, $10, and you got the picture. Come on. It's changed so much. And there's no more media. You go to the comic shows in those days, and like I said, there was people had cases full of animation cells, cases full of art panels from comics, cases full of all sorts of media like that, original media, original art, and it was so cheap. You wouldn't pay $5 for an animation cell. What do they cost now? It's gotten so expensive.
Well, I know for me, I started going to comic shows in like 2017. That's when I started collecting, and then we started going together, and we went to some, I know when we were in Illinois, we went to the DuPage County Toy Fair, and that was a pretty big one. It came up twice a year, and I think we paid like $10 each to get in, or something like that. But then they had the huge one in downtown Chicago, and we were thinking about going there, and it was like $150 each.
Yeah.
And we didn't go.
And didn't include anything.
No. And that was for like a day.
Yeah, and then if you wanted the package, if you wanted access to the panels, if you wanted to get autographs, it kept escalating. Attacking on hundreds and hundreds of extra dollars.
Yeah. So, like I said, I don't know how it was back in the 80s or 90s because I didn't start going until 2017. And from what I've seen so far, I can not go to another one. and I'm just being honest because now the very last one we went to was in, I want to say September or October, something.
The G.I. Joe show.
Yeah, the G.I. Joe show in Augusta, Georgia. Yeah. And I actually bought some stuff. I bought a lot of stuff. Normally I go and I don't buy anything because, I don't see anything that I want. So that right there, because you go in and like I said before, you see the exact same thing. Everybody has the same thing.
The same stuff, and most of it's new.
Yeah, they got the NECA, those NECA boxes that you see in all of the stores, the Pops.
Super 7 stuff.
Stuff, Marvel Legends. You see all of that stuff. And then if you do find something that's vintage, it's not complete, but they want complete prices for it.
Yeah.
And then if it is complete, then they want astronomical prices for it. And it's like, okay, I can find that better on eBay, even with shipping and taxes is cheaper than what you're doing.
Yeah. And, that ties in. We talked about that a little bit here a few minutes ago. With you were asking me, what did you see the same things over and over again at these tables in the old shows in the 80s and 90s? No, you didn't. There were people that were specific groups, specific groupings of certain things. Like you might have a few tables where it's all cap guns. You might have a few tables where it's a Joe collector, a few tables where it's Star Wars. But you didn't see too much of the exact same thing over and over again.
And now that we're having the pandemic and everything else that's going on, shows are starting to get a little less and less, a little far and in between. So we
Yeah.
don't see them as often coming up. But we still look, and we go and we see they have a lot of pop swaps that come up all the time. We kind of quit going to those
Yeah, I don't
because
think I
they're
want to go to
kind
another pop shop. A swap.
yeah, because they don't swap. They want
Yeah,
to swap cash.
That's a good point, because it started off, the whole point of this pop swap was to go and be able to trade. And that very quickly dissolved into, well, I didn't come here to really do all that. I need to get cash for this.
Yeah.
So that came and went very quickly.
Yeah, because I know we went to the first time we had a few that we wanted to swap, and other people came with stuff to swap, and they were like, no, I'm not really looking for that.
Yeah, I'm not really looking to trade right now. What are you doing here?
Selling my stuff.
They still call it a pop swap, but it's not. It's a straight up sale at this point.
Yeah, it's a pop sale,
And
because that's
again,
all they had.
Same prices that you could find on eBay. So it's like, what's the point?
And then even with that, it wasn't the older pops.
Yeah.
It was the newer ones, the ones that should be in the store.
Because the ones that people really are desiring are from like 2015 and back. But you hardly see that.
Yeah, they had all the exclusives. Everything had a sticker on it.
Yeah, or chases.
Yeah, some type of something or
Yeah.
another.
And that gets old. It gets old fast.
Yeah, very fast. Well, do you have anything else you want to add on to that your experience, your prior experience of going to comic conventions?
I don't know. I mean, I just like to see more of that, and I'm hoping or like the big show in Chicago wasn't so bad for vintage stuff. And where was that? That was at the fairground.
Yeah, that's the DuPage County that I talked about.
Yeah. So I go to the show. I want to see the older stuff. I don't really want to see the newer stuff. And if you're going to the show looking for newer stuff, that's fine. Everybody collects their own thing. Personally, I prefer to find older stuff. And another interesting switch too with this last show that we went to. Part of the reason why we were also more willing to buy is because the prices were better than what you're seeing on eBay right now.
Yeah.
In a manner of speaking, because for the vintage stuff, because between the new tax laws where tax is being collected on every single eBay sale, and Macari too, right?
Macari too, because I purchase a lot from Macari.
And the escalating shipping costs, it was actually cheaper to find it at the show. And for that reason also, I would really love to see more vintage at the conventions. And I know a lot of people also, this might come up because I see it every once in a while, you got to support your local toy shop. You've been in the local toy shops lately? They've got like at least half or more new stuff also. And then the older stuff they have is mostly overpriced. And I hear, oh yeah, you get to know them. I'm buddies with so and so, and I can get a good price. And they're buddies with everybody. Everybody who goes in there thinks they're this shop dealer's pal,
Yeah.
and that they're getting a special discount.
Well,
You know, that's part of the game. There aren't too many examples of toy stores around anymore that you can walk in and everything. It's going to be a lot of vintage stuff, and it's going to be a lot of rotation. One of the few examples I can think of is Aaron.
yeah, when we were in Chicago, but the thing that I was going,
Wax Pack.
yeah,
Wax Pack.
he was in I can't even remember the town now because
Yeah.
it's not in Chicago.
Well, they can look up Wax Pack in
Yeah.
Illinois and they'll find him. But his store's cluttered.
Yeah,
But
you'll be a couple of hours.
yeah, he's got
But
he's
you'll
got a
find
lot
something.
to see, and he is really easy to work with.
Yeah,
There's not too many guys like him out there anymore as far as toy shops.
but it's surprising because we live in the Atlanta area and it's a, I guess a big metropolitan city. But it's not a lot of toy shops
No.
around here. It's maybe 4.
Yeah.
And out in those 4, one of them is basically solely pops.
Yeah.
That's all they sell.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another one. They have some vintage stuff. It's one I think in Jonesboro
Yeah.
we went to.
Those are two that are near each other?
No, that's
Or you're
in
thinking of the other
Marietta.
ones? Okay, okay.
The 2 in Marietta.
Try not to name them.
Yeah,
Here.
it's plus I don't remember the name. No way.
Yeah.
But the 2 in Marietta, they're close to each other. They sell pops, but they sell a lot of modern. And when I say modern, I'm talking about like 2000 up.
Yeah.
Pretty much
action figures.
nothing older than 2000 at least. And 2000 is vintage now because that was 20 years
Yeah,
ago.
now.
If you really look at it. The other one in Jonesboro, we went there only once because we passed by and saw it. But the point is, for this area and to be such a, I don't know, metropolitan
yeah.
area, it's supposed to be a big
A
city.
larger populated area.
They don't have a lot of toy shows, and they don't have a lot of toy shops. So we don't get the support out. And I went to a comic shop one time and bought a comic book. No, we went to a couple of comic shops.
Yeah, there's
actually.
a couple of comic shops around
Yeah,
here.
comic book shops. We went to 3.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, we actually went to 3, and they were basically just comic shops. They had a couple.
Another
of things
big
in
change in the comic shops too is, like I had pointed out, they got their wall with all the new books, and then the other wall last week's, and then you got the bins for overstock. But then they always had the vintage books all around the top of the wall books. You don't see that very much in comic shops anymore either.
People steal them books.
The wall, oh, do they?
I don't know. I don't go.
Most of the time when I found out about wall books getting stolen from a comic shop, it was an employee.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I made the manager of New England Comics, the district manager of New England Comics, real mad, warning him about an employee once. He was pissed off at me. He was like, don't tell me how to run my shop. And it's like, okay, and then that kid, because I had recognized him from the shows, stole a lot of product from them.
Robbed him
And
blind.
then afterwards, he didn't have nothing to say. The district manager, whose name was also David, he was like, what happened to so-and-so? I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, I bet you don't. But the wall book era is kind of gone from a lot of these comic shops. All the books that are up there are all like these variant covers and exclusives and things like that. But you don't see too much vintage stuff hanging up there anymore, at least not in my experience recently, in recent years. Might be different in some shop where you are.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all for this topic. Do you have
Okay.
anything else?
No, that'll do.
All right.
All right.
So until the next conversation.
Yeah.